All right, before I really get into it this morning, simple question. If you were going to rate Old Testament Bible characters, who was the greatest character in the Old Testament, who would you pick? Moses. I hear David. Moses, David. That's what I expected the answers to be. So I say that because I want to point out that Moses, if not the greatest Old Testament character, was certainly one of the greatest Old Testament characters. And having said that, I'm going to pick on Moses today. It is a really biblical characteristic that almost all of the biblical heroes in the Old Testament, they all have flaws. None of them are perfect. And Moses, as great as he was, as awesome as he wasn't perfect. And so today I'm going to pick on him a little bit. I'm going to pick on him a lot, actually, and make him, for today's message, not the role model that we really want to think about for today, in spite of the fact that overall he was awesome. Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. I'm going to read verses 1 to 11. This is hard to find, page 46, if you're using one of the worship Bibles. Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 11. Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 11. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock out on the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? So Moses is directly called by God through this miraculous burning bush, a story that many of you will be familiar with. And his first response is, I'm not really the guy. Why would you call on me to do this? Well, in verses 12 to 22, which I'm not going to read, Moses makes excuses. He explains to God why he's not really the right guy, and this problem and that problem, and God counters them and says, well, don't worry about it, I'll be there for you, and all of these things. And so, we have Moses making excuses and God countering the excuses. But Moses doesn't quit. Let's move on to chapter 4. I am going to read verses 1 to 13 here. Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Then the Lord said, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Man after my own heart. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out, took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Then the Lord said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous. It has become as white as snow. "Now put it back into your cloak," he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored, like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, "If they do not believe or believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile, pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground." And Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Well, I think that is not Moses' proudest moment. After being called by God, after making excuses, after God took care of every excuse and gave him signs to prove and this, that, after all of that, Moses says, "Please send someone else." Think about that. Directly called by God through the burning bush and being given all of these signs and miracles and proofs and assurance that I'll take care of your speech and all of this stuff. Moses, please send someone else. Bad moment for Moses. One of those flaws that I talked about earlier. Well, I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. And we are now going to jump to the book of Isaiah, chapter 6. What we have here is a worship setting. There are some scholars who believe it was related to the funeral that is briefly mentioned in the first verse here. Others think it was sometime later. But it's apparently Isaiah goes to the temple and he's involved in worship. Not unlike maybe what we're doing. But let's read the first 4 verses here. Isaiah talking or writing. "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 rings they covered their faces. With 2 they covered their feet. And with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. So there's the worship setting, and Isaiah has this vision. And of course, this vision represents the glory of God. He kind of sees an image of the majesty, and he gets a feeling of the true glory of God. And the seraphim, those are supposedly a class of angels. There's cherubs and seraphs and the kind that look more like people. But these seraphim had 6 wings. And I've seen several different artists try to show what that might have looked like. And you can see these pairs of wings starting high up and going down. And with 2 of their wings, they're covering their own faces because they can't look directly at the glory of God. And with 2 wings, they cover their feet, which kind of reminds me of Moses being told to take his shoes off. Like the feet, glory of God, all that. And then with 2 other wings, the ones in the middle, they're flying. And as they're doing that, they're shouting, holy, holy, holy. That kind of praise is going on by these beings that God created to bring him glory. And so Isaiah is seeing that and experiencing that in that worship service. And then in verse 5, we get his response. Woe to me, I cried. I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. So his first response when confronted with the glory of God is this very keen realization and awareness of his own sinfulness and inadequacies. He's thinking, with God so holy and glorious, and I'm so sinful, I can't even be in his presence. I can't survive in his presence because I'm so unworthy. I'm ruined. Woe is me for having seen this. As awesome as it was, I'm just not fit for it. And so that's kind of what's going through Isaiah's mind at this time. Verses 6 and 7. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. So I find it interesting that when Isaiah first declares, Woe is me, I am ruined, I am a man of unclean lips, God didn't say, Don't worry about it, Isaiah, you're fine. Don't beat yourself up. You don't have to worry about it. God didn't say, what you're saying is not true. You just need help with your self-esteem. None of that came from God. What God did do was basically kind of agreed that Isaiah had this problem, but then he took the initiative and fixed Isaiah's concern. He had a seraphim take a coal from the altar and touch it to his lips and said, See, look, I fixed it now. Now there's a lesson that we could spend some more time on, reflecting about ourselves. But God took the initiative and fixed Isaiah's problem. And then the first half of verse 8. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? So Isaiah hears here what I believe to be a short Trinitarian conversation. See, I told you I'd work it in a little bit later. Who will go for us? So you have God, not simply talking to himself, but I believe it's like a Trinitarian conversation. The Father talking to the Son, the Father talking to the Son and the Spirit. Who will go for us? Whom shall I send? So, please pardon me. God is looking for someone to carry out a mission. He has a message. He wants to take the message to the people. And so he's kind of discussing the Trinity amongst themselves. Who shall I send? Who will go for us? You ever find yourself wanting to recruit someone from a job and asking yourself, who should I get for this? Well, as a pastor in the church, for my entire career, there's always jobs needing done in the church of one kind or another. And there's always the question, who shall I get for this? Who can we ask to do this particular task? And so here's God doing it. Which brings us to the second half of verse 8. And I said, here am I, send me. Now, personally, this was, by the way, a great moment for Isaiah. Here am I, send me. So he merely overhears the conversation. Whom shall I send? Isaiah's like, here am I, send me. Now, personally, I can't think of this Isaiah story without remembering the Moses story. I think the contrast is just so clear. In the Moses story, Moses, or God specifically, calls Moses to carry out a mission. And Moses' response is, please send someone else. The Isaiah story, Isaiah overhears that God has a mission. And his response is, here am I, send me. What a contrast. Moses tried to evade responsibility, whereas Isaiah proactively volunteered. Technically, God didn't even ask Moses. He said, they're having a private conversation. Who shall I send? Of course, I believe that God was doing it on purpose. He was letting Isaiah overhear this because he wanted to see if Isaiah would volunteer. So the rest of the story, which I didn't read, God accepted Isaiah's volunteerism. Isaiah said, here I send me. God basically said, okay. And the passage is subtitled Isaiah's Commission. So this story kind of tells the story of Isaiah being called to carry out the mission and how that came about. And then if you read the book of Isaiah, you'll see the ministry of Isaiah and all that he did during his time and the message that he conveyed and the people that he went to and the things that happened to him and all of that, including the book itself having been written. And all of those great passages. You start thinking about some of the great passages of the Old Testament. There's a good number of those right in the book of Isaiah. Because Isaiah was willing to take this mission upon himself. Well, I believe that we are encouraged or even called to be like Isaiah. I want to read one more passage, this time in the New Testament, Romans chapter 12, verse 1. I believe this is an example of us being called to be like Isaiah. Romans 12:1. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. That phrase, in view of God's mercy, remember in our Isaiah story, Isaiah had just experienced God's mercy. He saw God and he said, I'm not even fit for this. I'm ruined for even being in God's presence because I'm not worthy. And God said, I'll take care of that. See, your sins are forgiven and you're taken care of. They're atoned for. And so he just experienced that. And Paul is telling us, in view of God's mercy, so we ought to be looking at the way what God has done for us. He's talking to God's people, so it's people that have accepted Christ and been saved. In view of what God's done for you, think about what he did. And then Paul's instruction was, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. It's kind of like Isaiah volunteering. Here am I, send me. So we live in a time and a place when God has done such great things for us. And he has a mission to be carried out. There's a very popular, y'all enjoy the memes on the internet? Memes are like those screen captures of jokes and sayings and proverbs and all of those kinds of things, usually with a touch of humor in them. But there's one popular set that I borrowed today, and so I want to kind of conclude my message with in a modern meme format. And some of you might recognize the meme. It goes like this. In a world of people like Moses, be like Isaiah. Think about that. I think we kind of live in a world where too many people, too many Christians want to say, please send someone else. My dad was a Nazarene pastor. He became one when I was 13. So he wasn't always one. He had been working for General Motors. He had been working for Chevrolet for 20 years or longer, and felt God calling him to preach. And he will tell you that God was calling him by way of dreams. A dream that repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated for 4 years. While for 4 years, he said, Lord, I'm not worthy. I'm not educated. My dad was a high school dropout. It's like a freshman in high school. I finally got a GED coming out of the Army. Never had any religious training at all. He had about a semester and a half of some college classes. And then he dropped out of that and took a job in the shop. He was tongue-tied in a very literal sense. When I was born, the doctors looked at my tongue and said, oh, we need to clip that because it's too tied. And my dad, they never clipped his, and his was pretty bad, and so he couldn't enunciate everything good. And he had a southern accent. He was born and raised in mountains of Kentucky, kind of had a little bit of that hillbilly accent. And for 4 years, he told the Lord, no, I'm not the guy. Pick somebody else who can do this. And for 4 years, he had the same dream. So he finally said yes. But I think that my dad wasn't the only one. I think there's a lot of people who their first response, their first instinct is, Lord, I'm not worthy of this job. I can't do this. Send someone else. There's got to be people more fit for this than me. Well, in a world of people like that, be like Isaiah. We ought to be saying, here I am. Send me. I'll do it. In view of what you've done for me, how could I not volunteer? That's the spirit we ought to have. In a world of people like Moses, and I'm picking on Moses today, even though he's a great guy, be like Isaiah. Let's pray.